why do I tend to go for emotionally or time-wise unavailable people?
Mm, that's a big one. I feel like a lot of people talk about dating people who are like emotionally unavailable.
And that's really painful. You know,
Yeah.
if you're in a relationship and then you're, you know, obviously you want to be in a relationship. If you're, you know, if you are in one, you probably want to be connected to
Yeah.
be. And then you know, to see that they're emotionally unavailable is pretty painful, you know. And the one thing that comes to my mind is that at the beginning we don't know who's emotionally unavailable most of the times. We might get, you know, a little bit of red flags here and there, but not really know for sure that this will be, you know, the way that the relationship goes, right? So
Hmm.
we're just meeting people, and then at the beginning things, you know, tend to be a little bit more like, you know, like courting, right? Like
Right.
somebody trying to show a lot of attention to you,
Uh-huh.
you know, try to get you closer to them. But some people are not like that. And there's a lot of also fears about, you know, like I don't know if you if this is still happening, but back in my time it was the 3 day rule that you couldn't text somebody after 3 days because
Oh my
that
gosh,
was
yes,
a
yeah.
while ago.
Uh-huh.
um
Hmm.
you know, where I don't know if that stuff continues to happen, but I
It
think that
does.
it does, and
Yeah.
it's sort
Like
of like that fear, right?
I've heard folks talk about stuff like maybe not specifically the 3 day, but it's something of like, oh, they haven't texted me back in a couple of hours, or like I have to wait, maybe a whole day before I text them back or call them. And that sends such a confusing signal, right? If you really are interested in somebody, what are these like arbitrary rules that we're like holding on to?
Mhm. And these conflicting signals, it's like the other person is on the other side too, you know, being confused, not knowing what
Yeah.
to do. So should I text them? Should I not? Should I
Right.
call them? You know, what do they feel? Are they interested in me?
Mhm.
And what all of this means is like, should I invest in this
Yes.
relationship or not, right?
Yeah.
So we see people pulling away from each other.
Hmm.
And most of the times they're not even like this because emotionally unavailable, it's because they're afraid of, you know, being rejected or afraid of investing too much and you know, not getting the same in return. I think
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I'm
um,
thinking about, say I hear people talk about like, feeling like they're constantly attracting a certain type of person. And I know there's different schools of thought about that, of like, you attract what you are, like that type of stuff. Have you heard that, Marissa?
I've heard about that. I've heard about that. And the manifesting, right? So
Manifestation, yeah.
you manifest it in your life.
I will say though that I do think that something, because you were
Mm.
kind of talking about the, like what are maybe there might be some fears of investing into something. I wonder if maybe sometimes too, a part of us might, even as much as we do want a relationship, might have some fear of a commitment. And so, like, over time, because like you said, I think, which I totally agree with, in the beginning, everybody's interested. We're all putting our best foot forward. And then over time, we do tend to see certain patterns, or like we might, see behaviors that's showing this person's not available, or that, maybe they don't truly want a relationship. And then so then the question to ask would be, what might be making me stay in those relationships after I notice
Mm.
that they are not emotionally unavailable? And maybe one of those things could be I'm afraid of the commitment. Like maybe the dating part's fun, or like the chase is fun, but the commitment part, which I've never actually experienced before, feels scary. And so it's like, oh wait, let me just go back to the easy stage, like the fun stage, and not actually have to commit.
Mm.
So that could be something that might be playing a role as to constantly feeling like you're finding those emotionally unavailable people, when maybe it really might be, there's something that's going on that's making you stuck in this pattern of not leaving when you see the problem kind of there.
That is so true. That is so true. That's very relevant. That's, you know, that's on point too, right? And like thinking about the other side. Um, I don't know what else. Let me see. tending to go for emotionally or unavailable people. I think sometimes, what happens is also that people who are really unemotionally unavailable, not just, the people who are confused, but also like the people who are really unemotionally available, I think that they leave you some things, they give you some things enough just to keep you there. Right?
Yeah,
It's not very clear
yeah,
that where they're like completely not
right,
spending time with you and completely ignoring you. So they give you, bits and pieces so that you stay there confused, and knowing if
right,
they really want you, if they don't want you. So it's really hard to live the relationship like that too, to not even know what to do
right,
uh, when there is a little bit of a push and pull, right?
right. And it can be hard to recognize too, it sounds like, because as you said, if they're giving you little like crumbs and droplets of like the attention, the spending time with you, but then they pull away, it's like you might constantly be thinking, oh, like they're gonna come back because they've done it before, right? And so you kind of do think that they are maybe available, but they're really not. But they seem like they are because they keep kind of giving you those little pieces.
Yeah. I don't know if you've heard about this, but I've heard people say, they don't come for like 3 days or 4 days, and then, we go and we have a date and it's really wonderful. But then I don't hear
Yeah.
from them again, like in 1 more week or
Uh-huh.
2 weeks, and it's like they leave you there.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, what am I supposed to do? I don't know, I don't know what to do in this situation. So it's difficult.
Yeah, it is.
It
That's
is.
when I might tell the person, well, do you really enjoy that? Like, do you enjoy not hearing from that person for a whole week and then you get, a little bit of attention, then not, maybe that might be an indication that it's not worth it. Or if you do like it, then great. But if there is already that discomfort, then it
Yeah.
might be time to cut the ties.
Yeah. 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 The reflecting piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
I think this kind of relates to the next question that we got, which is I know that my relationship is unhealthy, but I'm having a hard time leaving. What do I do?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think like that reminded me of like when you were saying like this, it's kind of envisioning like this cat and mouse game where, you get a little something and then it's like they chase or like they leave, like they call you. Um, say all these nice things and then you don't hear from them. And so I think that can make it hard to leave. And even more like emotionally or even physically abusive situations where there is often what we call like this honeymoon phase where things can be really bad, but then they can be really good. And so it's almost like there's this mind game that happens where it is confusing. And then sometimes we often forget the bad times, or even like in the bad times, we focus on the good, where we're like, oh, well, last week he was really kind to me and he was nice to me. So maybe he was having a bad day, right? Or like maybe she was just really stressed. And so that's why this happened. But normally they, XYZ. And so I think that can definitely play a role in why it can be hard to leave
Mm-hmm.
unhealthy relationship dynamics sometimes because of the good and bad fluctuation that can happen.
And Jody, the way that you're describing it, which I agree completely with, it sounds like, these unhealthy relationships are designed to keep us there.
Yeah.
It
Uh-huh.
sounds like they're designed to not let us go.
Yeah.
They're full of emotions, good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
So when emotions are, when things are going good, we feel really, really good about and hopeful about these relationships. And then when things are down, not going so well, we feel really down about it. But this vacillating between emotions it makes us hard to make decisions, right? It
Yeah.
makes it really hard to make decisions about it. Um, Very confusing, very muddy. It's nothing definite, where we can
Right.
say, okay, if it is some like an extreme violation of boundary, for example, hitting each other, physical, aggression, sexual aggression, it's really hard to say this relationship is not healthy, and I'm just gonna quit it, because then you have the little hopes, that are keeping you there, that things might eventually change.
Yeah.
Yeah. So having, I think, from what we're talking about, having acknowledging that it's really hard to live this type of relationships is one of the main things that we need to do,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
As opposed to feeling like there's something wrong with me for not,
Right.
this
Like you
relationship.
said, it's almost like they were designed, or the function of it is so that you don't leave,
Yeah,
to keep you there. And so recognizing that it's hard to leave.
yeah, yeah. I think that the drama, in these unhealthy relationships it's almost like, like it gets people involved and it tends to get a lot of people involved.
Yeah.
Um, and then it's really hard to get out of it, like a turmoil,
Hmm.
like a tornado maybe.
Yeah.
But the other piece is that a lot of the times they leave you isolated. People feel isolated and they start to lose friends or get disconnected from friends, from support system,
Family.
family, right? If it is an unhealthy relationship, chances are that other people have seen that, have noticed
Mhm.
that,
Yeah.
they tell us, and then we don't want to hear it. We become upset, and then we become detached.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's out of like embarrassment too.
I was
Right?
just gonna say, like, sometimes the embarrassment and shame can also prevent us from leaving because, it is embarrassing. Sometimes I know, I'm sure we've all had a thought at some point of like, oh, that could never happen to me. But the reality is like it can happen to anybody. And a lot of times these relationships don't always start terrible, right? Like they are often very charming in the beginning, or there's great chemistry, things are really dynamic and big emotions in the beginning, and that's what draws us in. Um, and then that's where like the unhealthy stuff
Mm.
comes in and the turmoil. And so recognizing that, there really is no need to feel embarrassed or shame, and recognizing that there's nothing that you did wrong as an individual, right? Like these are just sometimes dynamics or situations that happen. And as you said, like not if we are isolated, trying to find ways to get back connected into, our community or our supports, maybe reaching out to some friends, maybe even those friends who may have reached out at some point or have like, expressed some concerns, maybe, going to them and expressing that you're wanting some help, that like you're ready.
Uh, that also reminds me that sometimes people, because of that shame and embarrassment,
Yeah.
um, they keep this dynamic secretive.
Yeah, that's true.
They
Yeah.
don't tell. And some of
Hmm.
these relationships, they either display these unhealthy things in front of other people, or they actually become the opposite and they're like perfect outside, in
Yeah.
front of everybody else.
Yeah.
When the person says, hey, like this relationship is not working out for me, everybody's like, are you crazy? What's wrong
Right.
with you?
Right. They're like, they're perfect. What do you mean?
They're perfect,
Yeah.
what's wrong with you?
Hmm.
No, you're so lucky, right? So it makes us feel even
Yeah.
more like alone, more isolated. And then on the other piece, when it happens, in front of other people, is extremely embarrassing. Somebody answers to you in a nasty way in front of your friends, in front of your family, and everybody can see that, and you can see everybody feeling awkward and being awkward and not knowing what to do.
Yeah.
So it's hard to come back later on to them and say, like, you were right, like I'm
Mhm.
stuck and I don't know how to live. Um, so it's very difficult. It's very difficult. But I think that the piece that you're talking about, the getting the support system, I would say is probably the main one, right? Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I would agree. Sure.
Getting a support system.
All right. Our next question. Also something that comes up a lot. My parent struggles with addiction and I don't know how to set boundaries with them.
I think that, when we think about boundaries, we think about, setting boundaries, we think about something that is more, formal and more rigid and more, that maybe requires like a negative reaction from people, like it elicits a negative reaction from people. And when I think about boundaries, I think about it as something that we do almost all the time with people. especially with parents. We as little kids, we tell the parents, we tell them somehow, even when we don't have the language, we tell them what is it that we like or what we don't like.
That's really true. Yeah.
Yeah, so
I was thinking, I was like, I think boundaries with especially parents can be hard. But the way that you're framing it, yeah, I can see even from a kids definitely do.
yeah, we have done it. We have done it since we have been, I don't know if babies, but
Yeah.
very small, right?
Hmm.
With my son, for example, I know that when he's upset, we can joke with him. With my daughter, we can joke with her. But he lets us know this is not okay with me. When I'm upset, leave me alone. Don't joke.
Yeah.
Don't try make fun of it, or not that we make fun of it, but like don't try to lighten up the mood.
Yeah.
My daughter is different, so he's setting a boundary there. He's
Yeah.
letting us know, like,
Absolutely.
this is not okay with me. Don't do it. I don't like it, right?
Yeah.
And kids, they do it with other kids too, and they tell them like, don't scream at me, or don't be rude, so they're setting boundaries.
Yeah.
And somehow, as adults, we get this idea that setting boundaries is so hard, when it's so scary and so difficult. But we really have been doing it for a long time, and
Yeah.
we have been doing it with many people. So when I think about, setting boundaries with, your parents, think about it that it's not the first time that you're gonna be setting boundaries with them. I think as adults, setting boundaries with somebody with addiction is really hard.
Hmm.
I think, that part, especially a parent, that
Yeah.
one is really hard to do because, there's issue that of enabling them, you know, there's they're struggling, and so you're in this middle situation between, like wanting to help them, but at the same time knowing that sometimes some of the ways that we want to help them or they ask us to help them,
Hmm.
it goes towards enabling them,
Yeah.
and even sacrificing ourselves too much to the point where it's pretty damaging, right? So I think about, let's say somebody um who's dealing with alcoholic problems, and then they're driving under the influence, and then do you pick them up to make sure that they don't come home driving,
Yeah.
driving under the influence? Do you call an Uber? Do you like that stuff
Yeah.
is
Those are hard decisions to try to make.
really hard. It's really hard.
I'm thinking about, because I know I've definitely had the conversation about setting boundaries with a parent before with a client, and I know something that often comes up is perhaps like even though, as you say, we technically have been setting boundaries from when we were kids and like younger, it feels like there's something as we do get older where there's either more pushback from the adults or especially parents, um, as like, where there's like this greater power dynamic that then kind of like comes into play. I think it is a little bit more present still as a kid, but I think it's easier, like you said, it's like kids they don't like something, they'll start crying or they tell you no, 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 and it's like it's really hard to ration with a kid. But as you get older, there's more that like power dynamic, and oftentimes there's this feeling of, well, I tried to tell my parent, as a teen maybe, or as a college student, I tried to tell my parent I don't like this, and they just don't listen to me, or they just kind of like brush me off or dismiss me. And so I can acknowledge like those parts being hard. Um, yeah, like what do you have? What do you think about that?
I think you're right, because what comes to my mind is that sometimes the parents continue to see us as children, and they don't even respect
Yeah,
some of the boundaries that we want to set with them.
yeah,
And it's sort of like, it sort of like goes both ways too, in the sense of like sometimes I see us too much as an adult, and then not almost like, you're telling me that I can't do this, and like, how dare you do that? And it's sort
Yeah.
of like that power struggle that you're,
Mhm.
you know, so I can see that. I can
Yeah.
see it's really, yeah. I
Yeah,
can,
it's hard. I think sometimes what I've told students before is, you don't even have to use the word boundaries. You can use like figure out your own language of how you want to have that conversation. And it really is about communicating ultimately. And I think we can also think about experimenting with of like the different levels of boundaries and like what is it that we really are needing from a parent. And it might also be asking ourselves what might be what they might be most receptive to versus not, and like slowly building on that. And so maybe starting with something really small. So I'm thinking, this question was about like a parent with an addiction. Maybe it might be something like a concern or limit might be they're not comfortable with maybe the parent bringing alcohol in the house or maybe certain drugs in the house. And especially if they are supposed to be in recovery or going to meetings, maybe it might be something like, part of your recovery and accountability is going to meetings maybe, or not having certain substances in the house, something like that.
yeah.
Um, or like maybe it might be, as you said, like the calling an Uber or like trying to figure out ways to not enable them. Maybe it might be okay, like this one time I will pick you up, but after this you're gonna have to find your own transportation or your own way. But maybe like kind of figuring out what type of boundary feels most important for you. Is it stuff related around not wanting to enable them in their addiction? Maybe is it something more focused on like your emotional safety at home if you live with them, or maybe stuff about physical safety, maybe, or maybe money, like not wanting to give them money. That might be like a really big one I can imagine. And so kind of figuring out what feels like, maybe the most important, and
Mm,
and maybe starting there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And um, I think that we need to be very clear about the boundaries that we're letting to that we're willing to not violate, but like be a little bit more
Be more
flexible with.
flexible. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And others that are definite boundaries that you can't really, you know, I cannot really bend the rules in this
Right.
case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the other piece is, I think also like reinforcing the positive things that they do. And then, so if you're feeling connected to them in some way, it's easier to set boundaries with them because they'll be more receptive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just easier to just tell somebody that you don't like something when you feel engaged and connecting with them, as
Yeah.
opposed to being completely distant. And then it feels like two enemies, like everything that I
Mm-hmm.
tell you bothers you, everything that you tell me bothers me, and everything is
Yeah.
set boundaries, boundaries, boundaries.
Yeah.
But there's probably something good, some interactions that happen in that relationship that could be worth, like worthy of reinforcing, right?
Yeah.
If they, did something, um, if they attended a meeting, for example, and they were supposed to do that as part of the recovery, I think it's nice to hear from other people
Yeah.
like, oh, that's really good what you're doing,
Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
Some positive
And
reinforcement.
yeah, the positive reinforcement. And when they do something that you don't like, it's important also to say that. And but the problem is when we tend to focus on the negative all the time, and then we don't really acknowledge the positive ones because we're mad
Yeah.
that they violated one boundary, and then we're mad. Then that makes us not even tell them anything when they do something good.
Yeah.
You know, so I think it's also that balance, keeping a little bit of that balance
Absolutely.
makes it easier.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point. And thinking about some of like, the basic, I won't say basic, but kind of like helpful, like communication skills, like, as you were saying, sometimes when we do get really upset, or like, I can especially imagine if it's like a family member or parent who's just like repeatedly done stuff and we're just like over it with them, we might tend to have like a shorter fuse and just more irritable with them and might want to constantly bring up all the negatives, and also recognizing that that's probably not going to make them more receptive to wanting to listen to us or help our cause. And so as much as possible, trying to like focus on just like that one issue at hand. I know sometimes it can be really easy to slip into, and you did this, and then you did this, and you also did that, and remember there's this other time, and it just like snowballs. And then that's where I notice it does tend to just become more of this big blowout and like a fight. And so really trying to stick to like the main issue or the main problem like if there was a specific boundary that was talked about and they broke that, sticking to just that. If there needs to be a larger conversation about other issues or problems, setting time to talk about that. But I think, really trying your hardest to not bring up multiple problems or issues all at once. Um, Using I statements, kind of focusing on how we feel, um, kind of like emotion focused words, I think can also help to disarm people.
Yeah.
We're less blaming and kind of focused on I'm feeling really unsafe at times when I hear you stumbling around the house, or, seeing you laid out on the floor, like something like that.
Which is so painful,
Yeah,
Here people are trying to set boundaries, but they're setting, a lot of those boundaries because they're also feeling hurt by
yeah,
their family member who's struggling, and by them, right? Like
yeah.
feeling hurt themselves, right?
Mhm.
And it's really hard. Um, I think that those I statements could be one of those opportunities where they mention, like, I know that you struggle with this, and I want to be able to support you, but I won't be able to support you in this way.
Yeah,
Like, I know that you mean well, or you might not be able to think through this when you're under the influence, um, but I won't be able to help you in this case. Um, I won't enable you.
yeah,
You know, um, and so I think that when you're communicating, or whenever we're communicating, including that positive piece that shows compassion and shows understanding, but at the same time, setting the boundaries.
yes, yeah,
Like, I remember, I tend to think a lot about the kids, just because, sometimes it's sort of like a similar strategy where we say to the kid, like, I know you're frustrated because you're gonna have a
Mhm,
candy right
mhm.
now, but if you eat a candy, it will not allow you to eat your food, right? And I won't give it to you.
Yeah,
And so you balance those two, right? And I think at least acknowledging, they feel that at least you're acknowledging that part of it, and
yeah,
they feel more receptive. If they don't, there's only so much we can do, right?
that is true.
Might
Yep,
not like those boundaries, but
they might not.
don't mean that we're wrong.
Exactly. Yeah.